Hi my lovelies, thank you for joining me today. Today's case is one that will break your hearts, as they tend to do, but this is one involving a child. And I think what really speaks to me about the cases I cover where safeguarding has failed and where children have died is it always leaves me with that sense of, could more have been done? Was there an opportunity to actually save this child? And inevitably, I always come back to the idea that yes, there was a possibility. In fact, there could have been a probability if people had done more to intervene, because the case of Kaylee Jade Priest has some big red flags that were occurring before this child's death. For those of you who are new to my channel, I release my content twice weekly here, and also I do it on my YouTube membership and my Patreon. So for all of you supporting me there, thank you so much. I hope you're enjoying your full-length videos and I don't have to worry about the community guidelines, so I can put out whatever I want and say whatever I want, which is a rather liberating experience. Also, I am sat here with my book, The Serial Killer Next Door, behind me. Apparently, it's getting translated into Vietnamese, which is just something I cannot wrap my head around and I'm eternally grateful for. So it's out in the UK, it's out in the States, and now it's going to be out at some point in the future in Vietnam. For those of you who get in contact with me and say you can't get it where you are, I'm really sorry. I don't have any control over that, because understandably I have a publisher and it's up to them. But I really hope that it gets to you at some point. And I'm not sure whether you're aware that I've got it on an audiobook, so you can get it as an audiobook even if you can't get the hard copy. And the soft book will be coming out as well for those of you who didn't want to necessarily part with the pounds that are involved in getting a hardback book. Let's talk about today's absolutely heartbreaking case. Let's talk about Kaylee Jade Priest. Gorgeous, gorgeous little girl. Born on January the 31st, 2017. It's unbelievable, isn't it, when I start cases like this? 2017, and I'm talking about her death. She was born to 18-year-old Nicola Priest. She was born in Brigham, England. Now, I think we can all appreciate that at 18 years of age, you're a very different person to how you were at 28, 38, 48. When you are 18, you are not expected to know the same things that you are as an adult. And I know that you have become a legal adult at 18, but you just haven't had the world and life experience that's going to form and forge you as you grow older. So I have total sympathy and empathy with young mums and young dads who are thrown into the world of parenting and do an amazing job, even though they're very young. But to have the same expectations of them as I would, like I said, a 38-year-old would be unfair. So she's going to have certain emotional obstacles to overcome, financial obstacles to overcome that might be slightly more challenging than if she indeed had had a child in her 30s. But she goes ahead, she has this baby. Kaylee's actual father's never been identified publicly. He left Priest when she was still pregnant. And this isn't unusual that a young person gets pregnant and then doesn't stay with the father of the child, because like I said, you've got a lot of learning, growing and developing to do when you're a young person, and sustaining long-term relationships can sometimes be an additional pressure, or the person that you've chosen when you've got pregnant isn't the person that you choose to actually have a long-term relationship with. Pregnancy happens even when you're not necessarily wanting it to. Now, when Kaylee is about a year old, Priest begins a relationship with Dan Gregory. Now, Dan Gregory obviously is not Kaylee's biological father, but he's amazing. He takes on a stepfather role. He's really enthusiastic about that. And according to people who knew him and know him and saw him with Kaylee, he was somebody who really bonded with her and he did a really effective job. He helped to raise her during the 2 years he and Priest were together. Initially, they actually lived with Dan's mother, Lisa, and you can imagine that gives a level of stability, because when you're a parent who's looking after your older children and they're in a scenario where they've met a partner and that partner's got a child, you have this wealth of experience in bringing your children up. And that means that you're going to be able to help transfer those skills to this new unfolding situation for your own child. And the fact that Lisa allows them to live with her, that demonstrates that she probably feels a level of confidence over Dan being able to grow into the stepfather role because she's present. Now, Priest actually became pregnant with Dan's son, and the three of them moved into their own flat in Kinghurst. Now, there isn't any mention of actually what happened with this pregnancy, but that's what I found out in the research. Now, according to Dan, Kaylee was a really happy, really bubbly, really energetic little girl, and he said that she literally lit up the lives of the people around her. He said that the thing about Priest was that she came across as a very inattentive mother. He said that when he was with her, she was never abusive. He didn't note that she was particularly neglectful. But Lisa, his mother, who's obviously more mature, more grown, more observational about a comparison base, because she's been a mum to her own children, and she's witnessing the way that Priest is acting towards her daughter. She says, no, I had some real concerns. There were instances when Priest's parenting style literally bordered on cruelty. She personally witnessed Priest smack Kaylee on the arms and legs, sometimes more than once. If Kaylee cried, Priest would often yell at her, which is really the absolute opposite of what a child needs. We know that children haven't got the emotional vocabulary, they haven't got the conscious understanding of who they are when they are little, and they need us to help them figure it out. We're there to sort out the vocabulary of emotion. And if you have a parent who is just yelling at you when you're trying to express a need, and often that need is expressed in grumbling or moaning or crying because you have a limited resource pack to identify how you feel, and you use these very, very early developing stages of your communicational style, such as crying, to let your caregiver know things aren't right. If in that moment when you are struggling with whatever it is, it might be I'm struggling with the fact that I don't like what you've served me for my dinner. It might be I'm grumbling because I feel sick. It might be that I'm grumbling because I just really like a hug. It might be that I'm crying because I really am struggling today with the way that life feels because it's overwhelming because I'm little. All of those things will give the same result where children's reactions are concerned. And what they need is hugging, reassuring, telling that they are loved and making them feel safe. If all you do is shout at them, first of all, you're stunting their emotional development because they've been intrinsically gifted with these communication styles. That's actually meant to tell us and inform us what's meant to happen next as a parent. And if you are limiting that, you are literally preventing that growing because you are making them afraid, then you're going to have some issues. And she went so far as a mother as to call that beautiful little girl names like rat and bitch. Now, I'm sure that most of you, if not all of you right now, are recoiling with just hearing those kind of slurs. Because the idea that you would say that to a friend in an argument is pretty blindsiding enough. I mean, it's not words that I've ever used. And certainly when you're talking about a helpless, vulnerable child who is just trying to communicate how they feel to you, it goes against the grain on every level as a loving parent. And if you can say that to your own child, and you can say that publicly, where other people are present to hear, then you have really poor boundaries. And that means that if you're doing it present with people, what are you going to do behind closed doors? And when she's challenged on that, because understandably Lisa is concerned, this is something that she's seeing play out in her household. She likes this child. Her son's involved in this child's life. She obviously wants what's best for the child. Priest says to her, she's been a little shit this morning. So as opposed to being accountable and responsible for, as a parent and saying, you know what, I really have gone a little bit over the top. You're right. I shouldn't be speaking to my child this way. Instead, the implication is my daughter deserves what is happening to her. And again, poor boundaries. And when we hear this kind of language publicly spoken towards a child, we know that there is probably really bad things happening when that parent is with the child by themselves. Now, over time, another thing that Lisa noticed was that Priest just became more and more indifferent towards Kaylee. So she rarely shows her any affection, she doesn't hug her, she doesn't kiss her. And another thing that I found really disconcerting and really upsetting was the fact that she actually said that she didn't even acknowledge her presence. So Lisa is witnessing this. She's seeing this young woman who's with her son with this gift of a beautiful little girl who isn't causing issues. Kaylee was a really lovely child, but she's a normal child. She's typical, so of course she's going to have needs. And as opposed to having those met, she's just neglected. And when we look at the actual impact of neglect, it is catastrophic on children. So we can see a brain of two abused children. One of those will have been physically abused, one of those will have been neglectfully abused. The brain of the neglected child is smaller because at least physical abuse, and this is horrific to say, but at least there is some physical contact, there is some attentional base. It's awful It's disgusting, and we all know what I would like to do with people who physically abuse children, but there is a level of physical touch. Neglected brains just suffer, they wither, because as human beings, as social creatures, as connected beings, we need to feel that level of assurance and care by our primary caregivers. But she's doing none of it. Now, when Dan and Priest move into their own flat, as you can imagine they would wish to do because they've been living with Lisa, they're going to want their own time and space. She said that Kaylee's space that they moved into was just really bleak. It's really uninviting. And of course, he also has a job to do there. I mean, it's not just Kaylee's mum's job to make the place look nice, but the fact that Lisa is looking and thinking, what is this mother doing to make this place feel like it's somewhere a child would wish to exist? Because obviously, as a mother, you're the one who's given birth, you're the one who's created this life, you're the one who's biologically related to this child. So when you move into a new place, usually it's paramount for you to make the child feel that this is an exciting place to be and that you've created a world around them that is child-centric. But she doesn't do that. In fact, the little girl's whole play area was a small chair and a table by the wall. Apparently her bedroom was really bare, it didn't have photos, it didn't have curtains, it didn't have decorations. And I appreciate that economically, Priest won't be somebody who is flush with the cash. But she is on benefits and she certainly can afford a lick of paint and some cute posters or pictures. It's not expensive to make a room look warm and inviting. Charity shop like I used to. Just go to charity shops. You will find a plethora of things that you can make a room look lovely with, and it will be on a very small budget. But Priest is not interested in that because she's not interested in her child. In fact, when she's challenged on why the house is so bare and uninviting and why her child isn't surrounded with what we would expect, such as toys and environment that makes it feel like a child is present, she just constantly gives the excuse that she's redecorating, that she hasn't finished Kaylee's room. But it's just clear that she lacked any interest whatsoever in making her daughter's life rich or full. And I'm going to be really honest, some people should never have kids, full stop. I cannot wrap my head around how any human being is gifted with the life of the child. Don't get me wrong, we all know there is pain and pressure where children are concerned, but when you actually are presented with the opportunity to be a creator of life and then to sustain that life, it is an honor and a privilege that is often underestimated in our own minds because we just think, I'm just a mom or a dad. But actually, no, you are creators and sustainers of life. It is a rich opportunity to transplant who you are onto a new generation. It's a really important job. And for somebody to just be so dismissive of that is really upsetting. It means on a daily level that child is just feeling no connection. That child is feeling just despondent because the world around them isn't rich, isn't full. It's the absolute contrary. And also, it isn't just Lisa saying this or Dan saying this. Priest's own family said, yeah, we've seen these things too. They said, we're not going to agree that she was abusive. We didn't see her being violent towards Kaylee, but we absolutely agree that she was really immature. She was very irresponsible. She was more interested in social outings. She was more interested in meeting boys. She was more interested in posting on social media than actually in caring for Kaylee. And again, we can obviously offer her age as partly an explanation for that because she is young, but there are people around her who are clearly identifying that she needs to change her behavior, and there are people around her who have the necessary strategies to support her, and it's just not going in because Priest is more interested in the world outside her own life, as in social media, as in having an opportunity to meet other guys, as opposed to thinking about her intrinsic life with her child. And as a young mum or as an older mum, your key priority, full stop, end of, for the rest of their natural lives is prioritizing your kids, whether they're 6 or 60. We all know that's what parents do. And she hasn't got that memo. She is happy to be entirely dismissive of the role that she has been gifted with. Now, before she actually had her relationship with Dan, Priest had lived with her mother and also her sister. And apparently during that period of time, she just left Kaylee alone at home, or she essentially pushed her responsibilities onto others, which is bleak. Now, her family, understandably, were really concerned by this. And as opposed to just accepting their point of view and saying, you know what, you're absolutely correct, I'm not doing a great job, can you help me? She responds by cutting them off. Now, the problem there is it doesn't just mean that she's not in contact with her family. It means that Kaylee isn't in contact with her family and her family care about Kaylee. But the reality is this is a punishment. And that tells you about the kind of nature that Priest has. There's a level of vindictiveness there. Because we can all be told we're doing a bad job and we can all rise to the occasion and change our behaviour. But in this case, she just simply wants to punish her family for raising the concerns that they rightfully have. We get to July 2019. At this point, sadly, and it is really sadly for Kaylee, Priest and Dan break up. She then moves to flat 14 Kingshurst House on Stonebridge Crescent, and that's actually in Solihull. Now, Priest was actually from Edgbaston, and a few people have questioned how she ended up in the 2-bedroom council flat in Solihull, but nonetheless, this is what happens. And by this point, bear in mind, she's also in her early 20s, but now she's on her own. It's as simple as that. She's got this 5-year fixed tenancy at Kingshurst House. She, at the time of the crime, was in really high rent arrears. So understandably, she's in a situation where she isn't able to manage her life financially. Some said that when she broke up with Dan, she actually did struggle a little bit, but she really did move on very quickly. So she begins a relationship with 21-year-old Callum Redfern. And I'm going to say from the get-go, Callum Redfern is the worst of the worst where humanity is concerned. Now, some people who observed their relationship, because I'm going to put that in inverted commas, said, honestly, it was a purely sexual thing as far as he was concerned. Like, Priest was saying that she loved him. He wanted nothing to do with that kind of relationship. He just wanted to use her body. And she was somebody who was asking him to move in. He was somebody who just wanted to use her. It was as simple as that. Now, as Kaylee had moved to Kingshurst, a new area, she hadn't always been present in the groups that children attend in that area, but she was at that point going to a place called Caterpillar's Playgroup, and the people there said that Kaylee was absolutely amazing. She was a child who really stood out for all the right reasons. She loved playing with dolls and prams, and she was apparently practicing being a sister. She was giving them bottles. The nursery staff actually said she enjoyed dressing the dolls and feeding them. She was a really active and busy child. She was really self-driven. To supervise Kaylee, one had to be quick and nimble. She was described as a busy little bee. So you're talking about a child who's clearly intelligent, clearly expressive, is developmentally reaching her markers, and is really well liked by strangers, people she comes into contact with on a regular basis, and staff. And yet her mother isn't involved in her life. She just kind of exists with her mother, but doesn't have any attention from her mother. Now, the very fact that we see this child having a level of, shall we say, energy when she's at that daycare will be no surprise, because her life as a child has been chaotic. Her life is in a situation where she's unsafe. Her life is in a scenario where she doesn't have the right kind of attention, and things that are going on in that 3rd floor flat in Kingshurst House are not perfect at all. There are parties, there are problems, the conflict you would expect with, shall we say, fractured relationships like Priest entertains. And Redfern, who she's now been seeing, they go ahead and they play loud music, they host parties. Those parties would end up lasting throughout the night. Now, this is really incompatible with being a young parent. It's as simple as that. If you've got a child in the house, you shouldn't be having parties full stop, because you've got a child in the house, and what you're doing, bringing strangers that you're not a fay with into your home. That's a really dangerous situation. If you're drinking or taking drugs and you have a group of people in your home, you don't know what they're going to go and do to your child. And we see predators use these opportunities all the time. Now, the council actually said that the address was subject of an antisocial behaviour complaint. And when there's an antisocial behaviour complaint, it basically means that neighbours have had enough. They can't deal with your loud music. They can't deal with the way that you are living in that area. It might be your attitude, but essentially it's gone to the point where an antisocial behaviour complaint's gone in. And the flat that she lived in is described as a really grubby place. Bear in mind, we know that it's a place that is bare as far as child-centric things are concerned, but it's just not a nice environment. Now, Callum Redfern, who was 24 at the time, he was described as a cunning con man who basically manipulated Priest. I'm not going to go down this same road. I think it's really easy to see the female in one way and the male in another. As a mother, it is your job and your duty to protect your child. You don't have the excuse of, oh, well, I've invited this guy into my life and he's done a horrible thing to my child. It's on your watch. So I'm sorry, you are the person with absolute accountability and responsibility. But what we're going to get told in this case a lot by those people who are defending Priest is that essentially she's a really naive person. She's a really trusting mother. Really, I mean, I think neglectful mother is what we would say is more in line with the reports of people around her. But Redfern, absolutely 100%, without a doubt, is a horrendous manipulator. He's very sly, he's very deceitful, he is very cunning, and he knows how to lie to get what he wants. It's as simple as that. Also, he's known to have a really, really bad temper, and that temper can flare up really, really quickly. So his impulse control is very low. And when you consider that friends of his were saying, yeah, one of the things about this guy is he just gets angry real quickly and he's somebody that just exploits you. They're his friends who were saying that. I mean, literally his friends. Now, I'm not saying that all our friends would say perfectly lovely things about us all the time. I'm sure we've had moments with all of our friends where they might be a little bit on the negative side about us, or they might give us some advice and tell us that we have certain issues about our personality. But for the most part, I genuinely think if we think about our mates, the last thing they're going to be saying to people is, oh yeah, she or he is a massively exploitative individual who gets angry all the time and isn't very nice. That's not what our friends tend to peddle. It's quite the contrary. But this is what Redfern is like. And what people say is this guy was using Priest for sex. It's as simple as that. He would go over, have sex with her, and then get out. Eat what he could. Apparently, he liked to make sure there was food there so he could look after all of his instinctual desires, but he wasn't interested in her whatsoever. And that's a really sad indictment for him. It's also a really sad indictment for Priest because at 20 whatever years old, no, it's also a really sad indictment for Priest because she's now over 20 years of age. She's got some experience with relationships, one of them which has been pretty positive, and yet she's allowing this man to do exactly what he wants with her. And that's why I'm using that language, because she is just an object for his pleasure. She's not an object for his care. So that essentially paints the relationship background of Priest and Redfern. So we're not in a good place. We're certainly not in a situation where the daughter, Kaylee, is now in a safe space because they are just using the environment to have sex, take drugs, and host parties, which is the absolute opposite of what a child needs. We get to the 9th of August 2020, and this is when the harrowing phone call is made to 999. And the reason for this is that Priest has found her daughter unresponsive. Paramedics at this point arrive at the scene and they find Priest on the bed. She's crying, she's distressed. Kaylee's on the floor at this moment in time. Now, I don't know about you, but if my child had been found unresponsive, if I was in a scenario where my child had passed in some unimaginable way, I would not be separate from my child when emergency services arrived. I would be holding my child. I would be crying hysterically, yes, but I would absolutely be present. My child would be in my arms, but that's not the case. Priest is on the bed. So even in Kaylee's death, Priest is essentially neglectful. And what is going on there? Because to me, that's a fear response. And it's not a loss response, because ultimately as a mother, you are going to be present with your child, even in these harrowing circumstances. But it's a fear response. It's that I'm on the bed thinking, what the hell am I going to say and do? She's not considering the fact that there is a child on the floor. She's considering her own needs, which she has done from day dot of becoming a mother. At least it's consistent. We can say that about Priest. Now, when the first responders arrive, one of the things that really stands out to them is that Kaylee's bedroom is missing carpet, it's missing curtains, it's missing a duvet cover, it's missing a bed. Basically, there was a sheet and a light bulb that was present. This is absolutely harrowing. I'm describing a child's bedroom. What was child-centric about what I've just said? Nothing. This is a mother who has completely disregarded any role that she was meant to have and just abandoned her care. That child didn't just die. That child died in an environment that demonstrates the level of impact she had in her mother's life. None. She was a hassle, she was an unwelcome distraction, she was a frustration for Priest. She wasn't a beautiful daughter, as you or I would feel. Now, Midlands Ambulance Service technician, Miss Caitlin Harper, they arrived at 11:17 a.m. and she said Priest was crying, she was really distressed, she was calling out, she was saying, I don't think she's alive. And Kaylee was, as I've just described, on the floor, but she was next to the bed, she was lying on her back. Kaylee at the time had been wearing these pink pyjama top and blue pyjama shorts when she was found, and what the technician said was, it was really apparent to me that she'd been dead for some time. And her body was stiff, her lips were purple in colour. Also, there was blood pooling on her torso. So automatically, they know something really untoward has played out. This is not what you would expect to see when a child has died suddenly, unless it's been a violent death. Now, Priest tells Miss Harper, who was actually a student paramedic at the time, which must have just been breathtaking for her in her early career, because we have to remember the idea of a child death is something very abstract until it happens, and then you are thrown into the agonizing reality that these things happen as a professional, and it genuinely is heart-wrenching and deeply traumatic. So she's going through this training and is suddenly confronted with this mother who isn't acting normally, with a child who is dead, and is trying to kind of garner what on earth has happened. So Priest starts to tell this paramedic that Kaylee had been put to bed around 7:30 p.m. Also says that she was sick at least 3 times the night before. And the paramedic said that she was told that the last time she'd been checked on was 10:30 p.m. So Priest is peddling this idea that, yes, her daughter hasn't been very well, but she's been checked on, she was absolutely fine. That same old classic story. How many times do we hear that? This child who ends up black and blue and dead was absolutely fine the last time I checked on her. And note the idea that she's actually checked on. So she's peddling this perception that she is a person who has been responsible putting her child to bed at 7:30 p.m. and then looking after her and attending her needs when she's being sick and then checking on her regularly, which a good parent would do. But we're not talking about a good parent where Priest is concerned, so we can take all that with a pinch of salt. Now, Priest said that she did actually carry out CPR on her daughter, but that's not what the paramedics believe, because, of course, when they get there, Priest is sitting on the bed looking after her own needs. Now, the technician actually said that she told her 2 weeks prior, Kaylee had fallen off her play table, and she said that she had at that point hit her head, but there were no other injuries that were obvious or sustained. She said that she did vomit after she hit her head, but as there were no other injuries, and apparently she was happy and fine afterwards, she didn't actually do anything about it. Well, again, if that is a reality that she's described, that is terrible parenting. Because I guarantee if any of us fell and hit our head and then was violently sick, we would get ourselves to hospital, because we're talking about something really untoward potentially going on. And if you have a child and you know that they've had a serious bump to the head and then vomited, that immediately makes you think, is there some kind of concussion? Could something be going on a neurological level? Certainly I need to go and get this checked out. The idea that she just was happy and fine afterwards, in spite of vomiting and hurting herself, just doesn't add up. Priest also told that paramedic that apparently she had a reduced appetite in the last few weeks as well. So again, if you have a child who suddenly has a reduced appetite and there's been a head injury in the last few weeks, certainly you're going to go and see your GP at the very least. But again, it more feels like she is starting to create some kind of fabrication so that it fits with the death of a child. So, okay, I didn't know it was serious, but hey, a few weeks ago this happened, and maybe that's the reason my child is now stone cold dead on the floor in this bare bedroom. It doesn't make sense, but Priest is trying to pedal as fast as she can away from her guilt. Now, that paramedic also alarmingly said that she could see automatically on observing this beautiful, now deceased child, that she had marks on her chest, she had marks on her torso area. She said there were also bruises in small clusters to her side. She said there was a red abrasion in the middle of her chest. So the police come out, understandably, because there's a child death. This is very unusual. And basically, at that point, the police say this is going to be a crime scene. So all of those fears and feelings that paramedic was having were absolutely justified. And what she also said was that at that point, her colleague took some photos of Kaylee's body, and that was just before they went out to do their paperwork. So then the police start their investigation, and some harrowing things turn up, because we live in a social media age. So you can bet your bottom dollar they're going to be checking your phone, your technology, your social media uploads to figure out what's been going on in your life. Because when a child dies, it is very unusual, thank God. And so usually they're looking at something tragic, like a child just going to sleep and never waking up, or a child suffering from sepsis that's been undiagnosed and they die, or they've been horrifically killed. And usually they can look through the technology and see the kind of relationship that the parent has with the child, and also the observations of what goes on in that child's life leading up to their passing. So they go through CCTV, and on the 8th of August 2020, what they find is that Kaylee, Jade and Priest are basically using the lift at the block of flats where they lived. And they obviously have very effective CCTV, so you can essentially follow exactly what's played out in those final hours, because this is just hours before she sadly died. Priest, in this lift footage, is just shown to be paying more attention to looking at herself in the mirror. She's scrolling through her phone, and you can just see her daughter just gazing periodically up at her mum's face, because that's what children do. They're searching for some kind of connection, some kind of reaction. You are the most important person in that child's life, even when you're awful, because you're the primary caregiver, you're the familiarity. And that child is looking to kind of connect, and she's just getting ignored. There's literally no interaction with her daughter. She doesn't even try to hold her hand. And again, on a safety level, any parent who has a loving relationship with a young child knows we always are holding their hands in public. And the reason for that is because we don't want to chance anything happening to them. And yes, you let them go free on the park. Yes, you let them go free in certain areas and environments that you are used to and familiar with. For the most part, in public, we're just very aware that we have a duty to protect our child. And so we tend to remain contacted towards them, whether that's constantly looking at them and chatting to them, or indeed being physically present by holding their hand. But not her. Priest shows no engagement whatsoever. And the footage, of course, also shows that at that point, and this is really important, Kaylee Jade's healthy. She's well. She isn't obviously bruised at that point, at least physically on the face, and she is moving in a way that suggests that she isn't badly injured. So this building up to this story of her getting sick and suddenly dying and maybe it being related to something 2 weeks earlier makes no sense. And that CCTV also shows the comings and goings of Priest and her, what shall we say, good for nothing, waste of space, really shouldn't have the opportunity to take breath, boyfriend, Callum Redfern, who's 24 at the time. Bear in mind, he's not really a boyfriend at all. He's just somebody who pops around to get a bit of the other, eats as much as he can and then does one. Now that evening, Callum Redfern came with his friend, a guy called Matthew Allport. He's one of the friends who describes Redfern in, shall we say, not the most positive of ways after this plays out. They end up going to Priest's flat. They take with them a bottle of vodka and some cannabis. Lethal mix. I'm sure a lot of you have got experience with drugs and alcohol, but when you are drinking something like vodka, which is a high-level spirit, and you're mixing it with cannabis, a lot of times it doesn't bring out the best in the human beings who are doing it. And also, it can make people really contrary. That's my experience. I've been around people who are drunk and stoned at the same time, and often they are just objectionable. I think one or the other is probably good advice, but this is normal. They're always getting high at that place. And again, what does that tell you about her neglecting her role as a mother? They're getting stoned, they're hanging out and drinking. They're not concerned at all about the little girl there who's just in a bare room. I don't know how you live even thinking that you've done that to a child that survives, let alone to a child who dies. Now, Allport, he's sat on the sofa in the living room in the flat, TV's on, music's playing, and Kaylee Jade's basically sitting at that little table, the only thing that's childlike in that entire flat. And at that point, she's eating. So again, we are aware that she's fit enough at that point to be eating. And also that means that the reduced appetite story, again, sounds a little bit like it's been fabricated. Redfern and Priest, they're out on the balcony smoking cannabis together. Around 7 p.m, Redfern then takes Kaylee Jade to bed whilst Priest remains on the balcony. Apparently he was gone for 5 to 10 minutes. Now I really struggle with this. These two have been dating for a short period of time. They are also not actually connected as a couple. He's just using her for sex and resources. What the hell is she doing letting a man who is not involved in this child's life, and when he is involved, he's not nice to this child, take that child to bed? It just makes no sense. This is how predators get into children's lives. And he is still going to be called a predator, even though we're not talking about a sexual case here, because at the end of the day, if he is going and taking a child to bed and then doing awful things to that child physically, because he's an angry human being, then he is a predator. And she is enabling that predator by giving her daughter time with him. He's a stranger. He shouldn't be anywhere near her at all. But this goes on because Priest is an absolutely lazy excuse for a human being, let alone a mother. So he's apparently gone for 5 to 10 minutes. The doors in the flat, as many of you who live in flats will know, they have fire doors because they want to make sure that they shut behind people so that if a fire breaks out, they can contain it. Now, the door to the living room was therefore closed, and Allport, who's sitting on the couch, he says at that point he could hear what he said were some things, so nothing very clear, but some things. Now, Priest then goes into Kaylee's bedroom, and Allport said that at that point he could hear voices. He couldn't really make out what was said, but there was some kind of discussion or conversation going on. The couple then, in a very classy way, bearing in mind that Allport is actually in the flat, maybe I'm showing my age, guys, when I say this, but I find it a little bit disconcerting and problematic. The couple go into Priest's bedroom and have sex. So Allport is now in a scenario where his mate and his mate's bit on the side or whatever she is basically copulating whilst he just sits and has a smoke, I imagine, and a few vodkas. Just feels so classless, doesn't it, at the end of the day? I mean, we all have needs sexually, I get it, but at the end of the day, probably contain those needs until the guy that you brought round on a social leaves. It just feels like an appropriate action. But Priest and Redfern obviously don't get that. Now, one of the things that Allport said was he could hear Kaylee whinging, and at that point he felt like it was probably just because she wanted to play, she didn't want to be in the bedroom. And in his police statement he said, after Kaylee had been put to bed, I did hear the door to Nikki's room being closed. I could hear Kaylee whinging. She stopped because she realised that no one was listening, but Redfern later went to Kaylee again before calling Priest to say she'd been sick. So he's kind of hearing that there's something potentially happening, but there isn't anything that's jolting him in a way that makes him think that something terrible has played out. Mr. Allport also said in court he didn't actually know why he'd seen Priest and Redfern go back to Kaylee's room, because bear in mind he had heard whinging and then it had died down. So at that point he hadn't heard her getting upset. It was quiet. So he didn't really understand why they'd gone back to see what was happening in Kaylee's bedroom, because essentially she quietened down. Now, after that played out and they went and checked on Kaylee, he heard Redfern shouting to Priest that Kaylee had been sick. He then saw Priest walking through the living room with Kaylee's bedding, puts it in the washing machine. Redfern apparently runs a bath. Now, the very fact that they're doing that makes me feel that when they went in to see Kaylee, they automatically knew something bad was playing out. The fact that she's instantly washing those sheets because they're sick on them, that provokes something in me. It makes me feel like she's trying to hide stuff. She wants to make it look like the child's room is okay. She's trying to kind of convince herself that getting rid of the sick is going to make her seem like an attentive parent potentially. And he is obviously deeply concerned about what's going on because he shouted her in, and they've obviously got some concerns about what's happened to Kaylee because he's running a bath. And like I said, if a child is not acting in the way that the child should be acting, and you are panicking and you are guilty of some actions, then running a bath we often see play out in these cases. They think it will wake them up, it will make sure that they're clean, and so on and so forth. But really, it's just a fear response to the actions that have played out minutes before. Now, after 10 to 20 minutes, the couple do come back into the living room. Allport said that he felt at that point that Kaylee had just been put to bed. He said he didn't really engage in a conversation about what had happened. He just thought she'd thrown up. Kids do. He said it was only after Kaylee was sick that he noted that Redfern seemed like he was very anxious to leave. And he said it was really strange because he'd actually been trying to hurry Redfern up. He said, I'd been telling him to hurry up for ages. He was fucking about. But then he said all of a sudden he comes out and says, let's go. So he grabbed his stuff, I grabbed my stuff, and we went. He said that what Redfern really wanted to do that night and had intended to do was to stay at the house with Priest because he wanted to eat food. He hadn't really had a lot apparently that evening, and he thought that she would have a full fridge and a full cupboard. He'd be able to essentially fill his boots, have sex with her, stay over, and then do on the following day. So it's all about using Priest, and it's all about Priest allowing herself to be used. He said that if there had been food in the house, he genuinely thought that maybe Redfern would have stayed, But equally, I think this is Redfern just wanting to get the hell away. Allport also said that Redfern had a really bad temper and that he'd actually threatened to smash his face in on more than one occasion. Apparently, he'd also stamped all over an ex-partner's car. And Allport also said that after Kaylee had died, his friendship with Redfern soured because he heard that he just wasn't speaking to the police. So he just genuinely couldn't be friends with him. And I think that's really appropriate, because if you know that a child has died and you also know that the guy you know was present with that child when they died, potentially, isn't willing to speak to the investigators, you automatically can assume guilt. It's as simple as that. If you've got nothing to hide, you're not going to hide anything. And Redfern has a really challenging history. He's not a nice guy, as was just highlighted by an ex-friend of his, but also he's got a history with the police. For example, he was actually somebody who led the police on a really terrifying chase in his BMW. Priest was actually in the car at that point in time, but she couldn't get him to stop the car. So he has really low boundaries, really poor choices, and impulse-wise is deeply problematic, and that gives us a character reference for who he is. Priest had actually withdrawn £900 to buy Redfern that BMW in the July because apparently she was, quote, head over heels in love with him. I mean, it's just really devastating, isn't it? That this woman is more interested in a guy that she's having sex with than she is in her child. Why would you give £900 over to anyone when you actually are in rent arrears? She had debts, she had problems, full stop. Her life was a mess. Her kid's room wasn't even decorated. But instead of using the universal credit that she was gifted by the government, essentially, that she was meant to live on, instead she decided that she was going to hand over the £900 to this apparent love of her life so he can go ahead and buy this car. Now, the car only cost £600. So when him and his mates went to London to get it, there was only £600 needed. But bear in mind, Priest has handed over £300 and he keeps it. And he actually said to Allport, don't tell Nikki, as in don't tell Priest. It's disgusting. Now, the reason that she bought that car was clearly because she was apparently in love with Redfern and he's just exploiting her. Allport also said that he didn't tell Priest the truth. He just let that slide. And I think that's really poor. Genuinely do. If you know that somebody's financially exploiting another human being, then at least have the balls to tell them. At least be willing to acknowledge the kind of con artistry that's going on there. But maybe it was because Redfern had threatened to smash his head in on multiple occasions that he decided it wasn't the best thing to do. Equally, life choices, kid. Maybe make sure that the friends that you have aren't physically threatening you on a regular basis. I'm just going to throw it out there. It's good advice. Allport also verified the fact that the relationship was sex-based. The only reason that Priest was going there was because he wanted to have sex and he wanted to leave. And he said that one of the things that really stood out for him was that Redfern was disciplining Kaylee and he was doing nasty things to her and he was doing it in front of people and it didn't seem to concern him. So he'd do things like put her behind the stairgate because he wanted to have sex with Priest as opposed to actually taking care of her. It's horrific to imagine that this kid was being exposed to sex, to drugs, to alcohol, to neglect. That was her very existence. Now, during Priest's interview, she basically said it's all Redfern's fault. She said he'd been violent towards her daughter. She said that he'd assaulted her a couple of times. She said, I heard her punching her daughter, which to me is an abandonment on every level of her as a mother. If you know that this guy that you brought into your home is beating your kid up, what are you going to do about it? You're going to call the emergency services, or you're going to do what I would do. You're going to ensure that they get out of your place and probably they get out of your place limping. And I don't know, you might be in the background with some large object like a baseball bat. That's probably what would happen to a lot of people if they assaulted our child. But certainly, once you have got them to vacate your premises, you're going to be on the phone to emergency services saying this POS needs to be dealt with because he's just done A, B, or C to my child. Now, of course, her excuse is, well, I could have done that, but I was scared of him. I wish I'd done something more to protect my daughter, but I was scared to ask him why he'd done it. That's just how I felt. She said, is it? So let's just go through that again. So talk it through to me again, Priest. Talk it through why you didn't do anything. I was just scared. So talk it through what you actually did. I did nothing. And what was happening? He was assaulting my child. But I was just thinking about the fact that I could do something. Like I could, I don't know, ring emergency services and ask for some help. Or I could even call my mother Or I could speak to a friend, or I could just ask him to leave and never invite him back. But I was just really scared of him, so I decided that I would just let my child suffer and I'd do nothing. Didn't you live separately to this man? Yeah, I did. Couldn't you just never have let him in again? No, I was too scared for that. Honestly, it drives me to the brink when I imagine the fact that she thinks that this is an excuse for what happened to her child. She also said, yes, she had seen the bruises on Kaylee that were caused by Redfern, but she didn't actually bother getting any medical attention and she didn't call the police. And she actually said this. She said, I said to him, she's 3. What has she done to me here? She said it was a warning sign at the time, but I didn't think anything of it. Well, which one is it? Did you or didn't you? Because the way you just described that is you're asking him specifically why she has been hit and the fact that she's only 3. So you are specifically questioning it, but then you're going, but I didn't think anything of it. But you did think something of it, didn't you? You did think, this guy's abused my child. And you thought, could I do something about it? Probably, but instead I'll get all the money out and I'll give it him so he can go and buy a BMW. It makes no sense. Make it make sense. It's not going to, is it? It can't make sense because there is no sense there. Now, in Redfern's police interview, and this is going to really affect you. I'm just going to say that before I give you the quote, because there are some quotes that are so brutal, that are so deeply disassociated from reality, that are so chilling in nature that it makes you feel a bit sick. And certainly what Redfern said in his police interview about Kaylee's death certainly turns your stomach, because he said when he was asked about it, it's not my child, it's not really affected me, and I don't really care. Sorry? Can we just take a moment to imagine our dream scenario playing out in the if we lived in a different universe, what could have happened game? And I'm just thinking that the officers who are interviewing him could have a selection of implements under their desk. And when such a statement that is just devoid of any connection to responsibility, accountability, or humanity, they would be able to select a range of objects to, I don't know, extract some emotional component in that moment out of the individual being questioned. I'm saying things like potentially thumb screws. Maybe let's go more modern, taser. Maybe let's think about just the old classic cattle prod, just something that could make us all feel better in this moment. But of course, I don't live in the crime universe of Emma where I am judge and jury. But if I was, things would have changed in that interview around that point. Now, the evidence showed that both Priest and Redfern were in the flat around the time that Kaylee Jade suffered her horrific injuries, and they are horrific. We'll go into those shortly. Further medical evidence actually showed that she'd been the victim of previous violent attacks too, so this was not a one-off. The pair did exactly what we expect these absolute idiots to do, these nasty abusers who just think about their own skin and saving themselves. They just blame each other. And so it's down to the prosecuting barrister, Andrew Smith QC, to basically prove to the jury how Kaylee Jade had come to lose her life. The sad thing about this case is that Priest and Redfern are not actually going to get found guilty of murder. I'll tell you that before we cover the case where the trial is concerned. But understandably, it is one of those challenging scenarios for a jury when they can't directly be aware of who landed those fatal blows. So they do reach a verdict of manslaughter against the pair, but I feel that I'm highlighting that now because we're all going to be a bit disappointed that they didn't actually get done for murder. Now, bear in mind, when it comes down to the case, they've got the CCTV footage of Kaylee's final hours, and the jury are shown that CCTV footage. They're shown the fact that Kaylee is in the lift with her mother. They're shown that there's no interaction with her daughter where Priest is concerned. They're shown that she's paying more attention to her own reflection in the lift than she is to a child's needs. And they're shown the fact that Kaylee Jade is in an absolutely healthy state. So that means that they're automatically able to narrow the time frame as far as when the child suffered the injuries. Also, that CCTV is really harrowing because that literally is showing Kaylee Jade Priest alive for the last time. After that, we know she loses her life. She's literally hours away from death. They get the CCTV from Kingsir's house because that also shows the comings and goings of both Priest and Redfern. The jury therefore has access to exactly what timeframes occurred where Kaylee Jade is concerned in those final hours. Also, there's a lot of evidence about how neglectful and abusive Priest is to Kaylee. The fact that she called her a rat and a bitch, that's brought in. There's evidence from Lisa Morgan, as we talked about earlier on, the mother of the previous boyfriend. She said that this language was something that was quite regular, and that when Priest was saying those horrible things to her daughter, she was screaming and she was crying, because she's getting the absolute opposite of what she requires. She's looking to her mum to protect and love her, and all she's getting is abuse, and it's devastating for this little girl. Also, evidence from several witnesses just painted a really awful picture of Priest. They said that she had no patience for Kaylee, that she'd have no food in the kitchen. There was actually a 17-year-old who babysat for Priest. She came in and she said the actual conditions in the flat where Kaylee Jade lost her life were awful. She said also the way that she presented her daughter just spoke of neglect. So Kaylee Jade's hair was always knotted, she had ill-fitting pajamas, and that she was never well fed. She said that Kaylee Jade's bedroom had literally no furniture hardly, no carpet, no curtains, no light bulb. So absolutely physically neglectful on a content level, let alone on an emotional level. And the jury, of course, had the other star witness, which is Matthew Allport. He'd been in the flat when the attack occurred. And he said that as far as he was concerned, she was a neglectful human being. She wasn't a good mother. And she was paired with Redfern, who was basically a money-grabbing con artist who didn't care at all about Priest. But the other thing that he said was, but what I can't say is I actually saw any acts of violence. I was present that night, but I didn't see anything really horrific playing out. But of course you didn't, because there were fire doors. So you didn't actually get to see through them because you're not a Marvel character. But I appreciate when you're in court, you're just going to say what you saw, and he didn't see any violence at that time. Now, Priest told the police that she loved Redfern, but then she also said at trial that she'd come to hate him and that she still hated him. I wonder why. Was it the bit where you found out that he'd conned you for an extra £300 for the car? Was it then that you realised that you were just being used like a piece of meat? Is that when you decided that you hated him a little bit? Because I reckon that will have bothered you more than when he killed your daughter, or when you both contributed to killing your daughter. Sorry, I literally have zero empathy when it comes down to let's try to understand this female perpetrator. Let's try to garner an understanding of how she has arrived in the position and place that she has. Well, because she's horrible. That's where I'm going with this one. No professionality in this, just a genuine overarching view of her character and personality. She's a wrong 'un, she's a horrible human being, and she has contributed to the death of a beautiful child she should never have been gifted with. Now, the court also was shown text messages sent between Priest and Redfern, and the text between Priest and Redfern, they painted a really incriminating picture of the attitude that they had to that gorgeous little girl. So the messages between the, what can I call them? Hookups, because they certainly weren't partners, they certainly weren't lovers. He was using her and she was apparently in love with him. They were read out to the jury, and one of those included where Priest had said, this is just days, by the way, before Kaylee's death, I'm going to kill her because she keeps leaving the room, so I've paled her one. Honestly, I would like to pale Priest and Redfern one. I think we can all read into what the word pale is, and I think we can all appreciate both of them deserve a paling for what they've done. Now, Redfern in a reply said, give her one from me. Now, his explanation when the police showed him that information was that it's just something that people said. So this idea that, oh, we're just having a bit of a laugh, saying we'll kill a child and give her a punch from me as well. That is not what any decent human being ever says about a child. It just isn't. We're talking about an infant here. We're not talking about a teenager who has stolen money from your purse and gone on a bender with the mates and you're like, I could kill them. We're talking about a little child, and we're talking about a child that is having a discussion by the primary caregivers in this case who are feeling that it's appropriate to abuse her. Now, in response to that message, Priest replied, I will, babe. I will, babe. I will, babe. I will, babe. I despair of this kind of lump of cells that somehow get to arrive on this earth and go through the motions of living, just doing diabolical damage to whoever they encounter. That is the only description I can give where these two are concerned. Now, 3 days later, Redfern messages Priest saying, I'm going to keep the little brat away from me. Sick of your spunking daughter. I'm not sure how I would respond if somebody wrote that about my daughter. I'm imagining that if somebody did write that about my daughter to me, they would certainly want to keep away. And keeping away would not necessarily be the requirement from my child because they're a child, but the requirement from me would be essential because of what I would want to do to you for texting such an inappropriate thing. It is horrible. It is dirty. It is dark. It is all the things that people should not be writing about an infant. Now, jurors are showing these messages and they are horrified by them because it's indicative of a really uncaring attitude from Priest and Redfern towards Kaylee. Now, Priest also in court claims that Redfern had been assaulting Kaylee before that final attack. And in the police interview that she gave, when it's read out for the court so the jurors can hear it, basically, it's alleged that Redfern's been violent towards her daughter. And she says he assaulted her a couple of times. I heard him punching her. So this is a real bad indictment for her with respect, because like I said, she's saying that she knew this was happening and she allowed it to happen. Again, it's repeated that she was scared of him. She said that she wished she'd done more to protect her daughter. But again, she's just saying it's impossible because I was afraid. She said that she had seen bruises on Kaylee that had been caused by Redfern, that she didn't get any medical attention. And she repeats the fact in court that she said, she's 3, what has she done to be hit? I don't believe that happened. I genuinely don't. I don't think she cared about this child being hit. But nonetheless, this astonishing claim is made because she wants to make people try to feel sorry for her. Now, a major moment in the trial actually came when jurors were shown graphic evidence of the injuries to Kayla Jade because they're horrendous. So Dr. Dewey Evans, that's a consultant paediatrician, they said that Priest's failure to check on Kaylee was terrible and said that the degree of injuries is absolutely astonishing. It is dreadful. They said this is one of the worst cases I've ever seen. And the jurors were literally reduced to tears as they told the court about the 68 external bruises, marks, abrasions that were apparently found head to toe on that beautiful little girl. Now, the defence barristers, they argued that some of the injuries to this 3 foot, 3 inch child, so that's how tiny she is, were actually from rough and tumble play. I mean, I don't genuinely think the defence really had one anyway. I think they were clutching at straws. They were like, we've got Priest, we've got Redfern, there's 3 brain cells. When we add those 2 together, and it seems that those brain cells are actually fighting one another. And we have to think of something to say. So we'll say, oh, now hang on. We've all done a bit of roughhousing with our children, haven't we? Yes, I remember doing some roughhousing with my children. I've got a little girl now and I roughhouse with her. It's great fun. It teaches them the boundaries of safe play and understanding fear. Yes, we'll use that. What? We'll use that. We'll use rough play as a reason that she got so horribly injured. That's not what rough play, it's literally the opposite of what rough play does. Rough play teaches children boundaries and, shut up. We're going to go with that. We're going to go with the defence. It was just rough plays. Anyway, that's what they do. Understandably, any professional worth their weight in salt, such as a pathologist, is going to be like, that's BS. The post-mortem counted 68 injuries. They ranged from dark bruising and blue bruises to red marks and abrasions. So the jurors are being read this litany of injuries, 40 of which were heard first, at which point 3 of the jurors are weeping. So before they've even got the extra 28, the judge literally calls for a recess, gives a 15-minute break because people are losing their minds hearing these horrendous injuries. Then they did the external wounds that were listed to kind of add to that litany of already existing injuries that had been read to the court. Tissues are handed out to the jury. There's a body mapping image of the injuries, and those body mapping injuries were actually linked to an example of someone who had been hit in a car crash or had literally had a 15-foot fall onto concrete. So we're talking about absolutely catastrophic injuries per se. Also, Dr. Brett Lockyer, who's a forensic pathologist, they said that the actual injuries included a finger mark print to the face and said that was likely caused by forceful squeezing or a slap, which is just horrific, isn't it? The idea that you could leave a fingerprint mark on somebody's face because you squoze them that hard or you slap them that hard. They also said that Kaylee suffered severe internal injuries from several blows, which was the equivalent of a kick, punch or stamp to her chest and abdomen. The jury was also told the internal injuries were due to considerable force. They included 19 fractures to her ribs. Just let that sink in. 19 fractures to her ribs. She also had 3 fractures to her sternum. She had a punctured lung. So she would have been in intolerable agony. She would have been struggling to breathe. Now, medical evidence was actually heard also in the court because Redfern didn't actually attend some of the court case because apparently he was unwell. I really don't understand how these kind of perpetrators are allowed to say, I'm not well, and not go. But at the end of the day, shove them in court with a bucket. If they're vomiting and having to use it to, shall we say, go to the toilet, I don't care. They don't deserve dignity. At the end of the day, it's about the victim. It's not about the perpetrator. But yeah, he gets away with it. It's too unfit to attend court. Now, when the cross-examining occurred with the pathologist, Mr. Andrew Smith QC, who was prosecuting, said, we've seen now the internal injuries to the abdomen and something of the injury to the chest. Looked at in combination, from your opinion, how severe were they? And Dr. Lockyer responded, they were severe injuries. For illustrative purposes, they are equivalent to someone you would see who's been involved in a car accident. The coroner's report said that the intentional assault occurred when both of the defendants were alone with Kaylee Jade. He also said Kaylee Jade was pronounced dead at 11:25 a.m. on August 9th. The pathologist also said that Redfern and Priest would have been present when Kaylee Jade was given those devastating injuries. Now, Priest, she actually did break down during the proceedings, but I would say that's because she's crying for herself, because it's really not looking good for her. Now, she's giving evidence, getting upset, but she's also denying that she's ever been violent to her daughter. She actually told the court, I've never hit her in any way to cause her an injury. Do you note that? I've never hit her in any way to cause her injury. I might have hit her, she might have been injured, but I haven't actually actively tried to cause an injury. So she's not denying abuse, she's just trying to play abuse down. She also said about how she was crying and screaming when she found her daughter stiff, when she found her with purple lips, and when they read the police interviews aloud, she was asked about what her first thoughts were when she saw her daughter, and she basically said to the officers, I was like, what's he done to my baby? So immediately she's blaming him. She also said, you know what, I shouldn't have left Kaylee with Redfern. He'd been with me for 3 months. 3 months, and she's letting this stranger, not right idiot put her child to death. She also said I shouldn't have just gone and had a cigarette by myself and allowed him access to my daughter that particular evening. Oh, really? You really think so? Oh, what a surprise. Yeah, that might have been a kind of normal assumption of a parent to actually have. Don't leave my child with a relative stranger whilst I have a cigarette. Just throwing it out there, seems like the archetypal response of any normal parent, but then Priest is not a normal parent. In that interview, apparently she also told the police that she was a bad mother, so at least she got one thing right during that interview. She then went on to explain to the police, basically, I've got a new partner and he smacked Kaylee's bum for pinching him or biting him and said, you're going to bed. She said, I went for a fag, but I shouldn't have done it. I'd literally been gone for 5 to 10 minutes. She then went on to say in this interview, she seemed fine in herself. I kept checking on her because she was puking. I've taken the sheets off the bed. She seems fine in herself. She just kept being sick. I sat with her until she calmed down with her sickness. I heard her shout, Mummy, and she was like, more pop. So I gave her more pop. I'm sure we're all imagining what it would be like to have a punctured lung and all of these rib fractures and horrific injuries to her body. The first thing we're going to be asking for is pop. That's just what we want, a sugary drink when we're in intolerable agony. So again, I'm calling BS on this. This is Priest just trying to make out that she did the right thing when she didn't. She also said the next day around 10:30 a.m. she woke up, she had a cigarette because obviously it's 10:30 in the morning. What mother wouldn't be thinking about her own needs of having a cigarette before she actually checks on her child who's been seriously ill the evening before, according to her own testimony, saying literally she's been violently sick on multiple occasions, but off she goes for a cigarette. She calls Kaylee's name. Talking about a toddler, and at this point she expected Kaylee to come out, but she doesn't respond. She doesn't come to the stairgate as she, quote, usually did. She then says to the officers that she went in to check on her in the bedroom. She said she shouted her because she thought that she'd jump out of bed, that she'd come straight away to be present as she usually does, but she didn't. And instead, she realises that her daughter is now stiff. She said she's just stiff, just stiff. She said, instantly I dropped to the floor. Now, at this stage, the jury is told that Priest begins crying in the interview, and she's then informed that her daughter's body is covered in bruises, and she kind of denies that she understands how that's played out. She didn't see any bite marks, she didn't see any bruises. She just reinforces that she shouldn't have actually left her child with him. She also said that she first called 111 and then she dialed 999 after finding her. It's really weird that she'd go for 111. I mean, it would be an automatic 999 when you found a child stiff. Now, the ambulance crew, they arrived at 11:17 a.m. They delivered CPR, and she had actually been told to do CPR before they arrived. She kept saying apparently she's 3, and they said we'll just use one hand then. She said that she did do compressions and she counted to 30 every time. She said that she did do mouth to mouth. She counted 5 every time. She said I was doing what they were saying, but I knew that she wasn't coming back. I kept saying to them, she's gone. She said that she couldn't put her mouth on hers because her lips are purple and she's gone, which is bizarre because she's being told to do this. Yes, it might be a completely useless thing to do because that child is not coming back. But as a mother, the one thing you're going to do is follow instructions just so you can settle it with yourself. Just because you can say to yourself in the future, I did my best in that moment. But she's just bothered about herself. She doesn't want to touch the lips that are now purple, even though she's contributed to those lips being purple. And again, it talks of an abject disrespect, disregard, and disconnect with her as a mother. She talked about the fact that she was apparently shaking when she was doing it and that she can't stop thinking of it. Really good. I hope she haunts you every second of every moment of every day for your eternity, because that child died in despicable conditions at your hands and you did nothing to save her. You literally took her into the lion's den and then you threw a stake in there as well to make sure that she got devoured. She said, I was just doing it at the pace they wanted me to, but I was trying to be gentle because she's only 3. No, she's not only 3, she's dead. You don't need to be gentle anymore. You weren't gentle in life, so why change now? She also says that she didn't do anything. She said, I haven't done it. And she's actually asked at this point, well, what do you mean? What do you mean you haven't done it? What happened? In one interview, she actually said, I haven't killed her. And she's then asked, well, who has? And she replied, Cal, as in Redfern has. She repeatedly told the jury that she'd never hurt her daughter, but it's rubbish. It's useless saying this stuff because they're going to paint the picture that you deserve painting. And it's absolutely one of a callous indifference towards her daughter. She had a callous indifference towards Kaylee's injuries that had prior happened. She has an absolute indifference during the messages between her and Redfern. Also, the TikTok videos that she recorded get played in court. It's not a good look. This is just weeks before her death. You've got Kaylee Jade appearing in TikTok videos made by her mother. And again, that disconnect is clear. So in one of those videos, Priest is grabbing her daughter's head, moving it from left to right in rhyme with the music while she's dancing. And there's a second one where Kaylee Jade's arms are being grabbed by her mum, who then basically makes her replicate these dance moves. And during cross-examination of Priest in court, it's not a good look. It really isn't, because TikTok videos are actually played to the jury. And those TikTok videos are played of her dancing to music and smiling in September of the year before. That was just 45 days after Kaylee died. Let's just be clear about that. If you've just lost a child just over a month before you make these videos, the only videos that you might be making are some kind of conversation with the public about your absolute heartbreak. You're not going to be dancing. You're not going to be smiling because you ain't got nothing to dance or smile about. Your baby's dead. And anybody who's lost a child, you know that getting out of bed takes monumental effort, let alone doing a dance and uploading it to TikTok. It just isn't in the context of what you've been through. Priest also posted a really sick TikTok video. In that video, she's basically heard saying, I messed up bad, and she's doing these tribute clips. This is just weeks after Kaylee's died. So she's kind of trying to create this picture and cultivate it in a way that isn't in line with reality, but is potentially making her feel that she'll look more innocent. And I genuinely think that we've seen this in lots of predator cases. They will try to do things that make them look like maybe they cared, but all it does is amplify how detached they are from the reality of what's played out. And she had actually opened a new TikTok account just a month after her daughter's death. She was putting up videos about the regret that had occurred in losing her daughter. She was putting up photographs. In one, she apparently was quite tearful. This is just 39 days after Kayla's death. She was saying, "I'm sorry, Mum and Dad. I know I've messed up bad. I should have done better." So this is a song and she's kind of miming to it. And then there's another video that she posted where she's posting the photo of the gorgeous little girl that is no longer present because she's dead at the hands of her mother and the boyfriend. And it actually featured her date of death, August 9th, 2020. And alongside that, there was a crying emoji. How modern? How modern? A crying emoji, several angels in the caption as well. I mean, there's nothing like talking about a child death in emojis, is there? But again, can you see how it doesn't psychologically connect with reality? This is somebody trying to seem upset, but doing a very bad job of it. It's a bit like when psychopaths try to mimic emotion. There's just something off about them doing it because they don't truly understand it. But then not long after doing these kind of attempts at seeming remorseful about her daughter's death, she starts turning her attention to viral dances. Again, what does that say about this woman? Literally, the last thing you're going to be wanting to do when you've lost your baby is viral TikTok dances. It's just so classless, so disconnected, and so devastatingly uncaring. The jury were also shown a video where she put up photos of Kaylee and also photos of flowers that had been left at Kingshurst house in the hours after she was killed. So Priest had gone ahead and posted those sympathy flowers, even though she was privy to what happened to that little girl. And as her killer, because without a doubt, Priest is her daughter's killer, she wrote, "I love you so much, darling. Mommy will never forget you. R.I.P. Angel." What? Like the gall of this woman. Now, as I said, Kaylee actually died from serious chest and abdominal injuries. The medical examination absolutely identified those historical injuries, including broken ribs, lower leg fractures, a broken sternum. It turned out when they reflected on what had happened in the care of Kaylee, that Priest had indeed been reported to social services by her own mother. Yeah. Her own mother had been really concerned about the way that she was treating little Kaylee. So Debbie Windmill, who is Priest's mother, she'd been so concerned about her granddaughter that she'd actually spoken to social services. Now, it's unclear whether any actual action was taken. I think we can all agree it wasn't, because that's why we're in this situation. Now, West Midlands Crown Prosecution lawyer Wendy Bounds, she actually oversaw the CPS case. She said of Priest's mother, she was trying to alert them to the fact that her daughter had this child, that she had left home, and I think that she was deeply concerned for her. Apparently they did come out and check, but they said that everything seemed to be okay. But there again, that's because every time people come to the flat and notice that it's not decorated, she basically says, "Well, I'm just redecorating." Wouldn't you think it would just be a good idea, I don't know, throwing it out there just for a new idea, that you would return to check? You know, let's just go a little bit left field and be like, let's not always take the words of the individual who's been reported as verbatim. Why don't we just do something a little bit unusual and go back? And if it's still not redecorated, we're talking about a neglectful situation. Wendy Bounds also said, "It's very sad that the children have to lose their lives before a spotlight is shone on what's happening in the home. Very sad." Jurors heard claims that Priest was somebody who did get violent with Kaylee, that she'd hit her around the head, that she'd refer to her as a brat when the little girl was crying. On one occasion, neighbours in a flat below said that they heard a bang above, and then they heard Kaylee crying, and then they heard Priest say, "I'll just say she fell off the bed." Now, I cannot blame neighbours for a child's demise. Obviously, it's not their fault. But WTF? You hear a loud bang. You hear a woman say, "I'll say she fell off the bed." You hear a child getting really upset. Why are you not calling emergency services? You've absolutely heard them concoct an excuse for whatever's happened to the child. You've heard something happen to the child. You're hearing the child respond in a way that says that they're struggling, and you do nothing. The same residents claimed that they noticed that when Kaylee cried, the response would just be to turn up the music, to drown it out. And neighbours said that they had to listen to constant parties that lasted loads of hours, but also had heard high conflict with Redfern shouting and also Priest shouting. The fact that the tone of their voices was always angry, it didn't express any love or care towards Kaylee, and with respect, it sounds like none of them did anything. Now, from the time Priest moved into the flat in mid-2019, residents said that they would hear comments toward Kaylee saying things like, "Shut up, go away, leave me alone," and there was literally nothing ever positive or kind. I say this again, guys, if you hear things like that, risk offending, report, do whatever you can. Children cannot protect themselves. We have to protect them. It sounds like there were so many big red flags, so many alarm bells that needed to be raised, and they weren't raised. Court also heard that in early July of the year that Kaylee was killed, a family friend actually saw Priest hit Kaylee across the back of the head and then pull Kaylee's hair. This is when apparently Kaylee went to get some food from the fridge. Why aren't people acting in these moments? It just blows my mind. It's just so wrong. Now, when the prosecution was telling the story about what they believe happened, they said there was absolutely no direct evidence that could tell them exactly what played out in Kaylee's final moments. They know that she vomited repeatedly. They know that she died of her injuries overnight. They therefore know that that little girl was obviously absolutely alone and was in agony and must have felt desperate. And she died without any caregiver being present. She died alone. That is harrowing. But the prosecution said the vomiting was the result of that severe beating and that both of them were responsible. They also noted that the reality was that both Redfern and Priest were just irritated by Kaylee crying, irritated by her asking to be let out, and essentially they put sex before her needs. And the fact that that was what really provoked their anger and cost Kaylee's life is diabolical. He said a prompt call for medical assistance by one or the other of you would have saved Kaylee's life. Now, at the trial, Priest was seen to be the more submissive party, so Redfern was considered the more dominant partner in the relationship, and it's clear that the way that each of them worked in the court was to try to blame the other for the actions. Now, as I said earlier on, upsettingly, both were unanimously cleared of murder, but they were both convicted of the child's manslaughter. The West Midlands police said it was actually unclear who delivered the fatal blows or whether essentially they both played a part. Senior investigating officer Detective Inspector Adam Jobson from the Forces Homicide Unit said the police believed the level of discipline that she was subjected to became basically increasingly forceful. It was more and more violent during Priest and Redfern's relationship. So they know an escalation. It's not that there wasn't abuse there before. It's not that that child was having a nice time whatsoever with Priest. It's just that when they got together, a folie à deux potentially, shall we say, that escalation occurred. We know that Redfern's a horrible human being. We know he's a con artist. We know he's a liar. We know he's horrendous as a human being. And it seems that when Priest met Redfern, it ignited her capacity for harm as well. So it was there, it was more latent, but it absolutely exploded once they got together. Now, that detective also said this was a heartbreaking case in which an innocent child has experienced terrible suffering at the hands of those who should be caring for her. Throughout our investigation, we strived to find out exactly how and why Kaylee Jade Priest died. Sadly, it will only ever be Priest and Redfern who know the exact sequences of events that day. One thing is clear. Nikki Priest has failed her daughter. She's failed to protect her, and she should have done, being a mother to that little girl. She should have been the one person able to protect her. He said, my heart goes out to the family of Kaylee Jade, who loved this little girl and had no idea of the suffering she was enduring. He said, I would like to thank our detectives, in particular DS Naomi Mouchin, and our family liaison officers who worked tirelessly over the 12 months on this harrowing investigation with the sole aim of securing justice for Kaylee Jade. Priest was eventually sentenced to 15 years in prison at Birmingham Crown Court. Redfern was actually given 14 years in prison at Birmingham Crown Court. Mr. Justice Foxton QC, who was presiding over the case, said you both lied repeatedly during interviews. You, Redfern, chose not to give evidence. You, Priest, lied whilst giving evidence. From the severity of the injuries caused by the assault, it is clear there was an intention to cause serious harm. He also added that Kaylee had been the victim of a ferocious assault that left her with fatal chest and abdominal injuries. When it came down to that sentencing, I think a lot of us feel that 15 years and 14 years isn't acceptable. I think that some of you might even feel that Redfern got off easily with 14 years. Bear in mind, we know that Kaylee Jade had previously suffered broken ribs, lower leg fractures, and a broken sternum as well. So this also meant that the jury were able to find Priest guilty of cruelty to a child, and the judge actually sentenced her to 3 years to be served concurrently. Redfern was actually cleared of the same charge. One of the things that was also mentioned in court was that Priest was apparently somebody of very low intelligence, and I don't think that's an excuse. You don't have to be an intellect to know how to look after a child. In fact, IQ has got absolutely nothing to do with you caring for your child. It's about connection. It's about feeling. And actually, you can have a low IQ and a high emotional IQ. It's as simple as that. But she was just feeling sorry for herself. She held up her wrist to her face when she was sentenced, just trying to look like she was really sad. Redfern was there. He wore a mask. He didn't show any emotion because he is the equivalent of a brick. It's as simple as that on an emotional level. In fact, a brick has more use. You can use a brick for certain things. Maybe going back to that drawer that police officers could have with certain implements in, it could have been placed there. And that brick could be used, I don't know, for some other options. I don't know, maybe paling someone, as Priest and Redfern would suggest. Maybe paling Redfern. Anyway, I digress. Now, Priest and Redfern need to serve 2/3 of their jail terms before they can be considered for release, but that means that they're going to have a lot of time free. Redfern's father, Andrew, he later spoke in defence of his son. He said that his son had become caught up in the relationship. He said he was only there so he could have sex at the end of the day. Wow, you must be so proud of your son. That's the weirdest defence of anyone I've ever heard. In fact, I would suggest shutting up as a father, because that does not speak well of the human you've created. Oh, he was just there to have sex. Well, he was there to have sex and also to abuse a child, and he did. Redfern's father said he's too much of a kid himself to be manipulating her. Is he? Is he? I'm pretty sure that he took £900 from her when the actual car he was buying was only 600 quid. I would say that he's the manipulator. Also, his mate said he was a con artist and he was a horrible human being and he was a threat to be around. So just kicking it in there, the fact that no one agrees with you. But Redfern said that essentially it was Priest who was evil. She was, she is, but that doesn't deny that your son is too. He also said that she didn't deserve kids. We agree on that point. He claimed that she told Kaylee once, you can just stay in it, after she'd essentially soiled herself and she was outside smoking at this point. It is horrible to imagine that that actually happened, that this child was in a situation where she'd soiled a nappy and she was basically just told to go and sit in it. Now, Debbie Windmill, who's Kaylee Jade's grandma, she said she deserved to show the world who she could have been because she's lost her granddaughter. She said, the opportunity to see my granddaughter grow up has been stolen in the most brutal of ways. And Debbie also said that the impact of Kayla's death was going to live with her the rest of her life. She said, I could never stop staring at the smile on her beautiful face. I loved every moment watching her develop to nearly school age. Preparing to buy my first grandchildhood preschool uniform was something that filled me with such happiness. I couldn't wait to see her in it. But this opportunity was stolen from me in the most brutal of ways. Everybody deserves the gift of life. Kaylee Jade deserved to show the world who she could have been and what greatness she could have brought to this world. Nanny will forever hold you in her heart. Nanny will always love you. It's just absolutely breathtakingly sad, isn't it? Because clearly Kaylee Jade was wanted. She just wasn't wanted by her mother. Now, critics of the court's ruling have actually continued to press authorities to change their sentences to life in prison. And I understand that. There are loads of social media petitions, there are loads of online petitions all raising awareness about who Priest and Redfern were and why they feel that that sentence is far too lenient. I do appreciate it because I think it's lenient too. Now, it's been 4 years since Kaylee Jade died. That happened in August 2020. Both Priest and Redfern at this point remain behind bars, but court documents show that Priest is actually eligible for parole in April 2030, which isn't very far away, guys, is it? It is breathtaking to me that we're talking about what can only be described as the torture and murder of a beautiful little girl, And yet somehow, Priest and Redfern, if they toe the line in prison, are going to walk free pretty soon. Is that really justice? Was Kaylee Jade Priest's life really worth such a short sentence? For me, the answer's no. They should be in there for decades. Literally decades. Not less than 1.5. But like I said, I'm not queen of the world. Sometimes I really wish I was. Because certainly, those two would be rotting away behind bars for a lot longer than what I've just described. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. As ever, look after yourselves, risk offending, guys, and be safe. See you again next time.